Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Demystifying Money. I'm your host, Misty Lynch, and today we're going to talk about estate planning. I know this is a topic that comes up with nearly all of my clients at Soundview Financial Advisors because estate planning it's really for everybody. And I think that there's a lot of times where we might have the assumption that it's only for people who are much older or wealthy or only for parents. And I think that some of those misconceptions can be costing people quite a bit of stress and anxiety and money. So I wanted to speak with Tiff O'Connell today. She's the CEO of O'Connell Law. And I think that her firm is helping a lot of people in Massachusetts, but also all over, really understand the importance of estate planning and why these things can, while there might not be the most fun or pleasant topics, I know I deal with money every day, and sometimes people would rather go to the dentist than talk to me about money. It's so important and it impacts everyone. So, Tiff, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Misty, and thanks for everyone listening in.
This episode of Demystifying Money with Misty Lynch is proudly sponsored by Soundview Financial Advisors. Visit www.soundviewfinancialadvisors.com to learn more.
So tell me a little bit more about your background and the process, the steps that got you to where you are here at O'Connell Law.
Oh, goodness. Well, so we could go on a long time, but I will make it short. So my background is I am from Massachusetts, and after law school, I actually did not practice law. I went into the insurance industry, worked in the insurance industry for 10 years, very good jobs. But I didn't feel like I was making a difference in corporate America. I'm sure there's plenty of jobs where that isn't the case and you actually are making a difference. But for me, I was feeling like I was missing something. So during that time, I was also in the Army Reserves as a JAG officer,
Mhm.
and I ended up doing an active duty tour down in Washington, D.C. at Walter Reed. My role down there was to represent soldiers as they were going through the disability process to help them with being able to transition out with a good rating for their disability. And during that time, I ended up doing some simple wills and power of attorneys for soldiers at Walter Reed Hospital. And Missy, if you had asked me in law school if I was ever going to do estate planning, I would
Mhm.
say, oh, heck no. It was never going to happen. It was just something that I found very boring. I'm just like, it's very dry. I don't understand what the lure is. But it was actually doing those wills and power of attorneys for the soldiers at Walter Reed that I realized that it was all about interaction to,
Mhm.
helping people. And so it was through that actually I transitioned into estate planning
Wow.
when I came home from my tour with the Army and get great experience with a firm doing estate planning, and then went out on my own in 2010. And so my firm is now 14 plus years old. We do estate planning, elder law, and estate administration. And I have to say, I love this area of law.
I think it's such an important area of law. And I think that, it was great this year because your firm not only is helping clients, but you offered a full day of education for financial advisors, accountants. And so I was lucky enough to attend because this is not an easy thing to figure out on your own. This is something where I continually try to understand it better, the changes to the laws, everything that's important that could impact my clients. And so it's great that your firm not only focused on helping your clients, but also by helping other financial professionals in this area because it's such an impactful thing. So for somebody who's never really thought about estate planning, how would you, describe it and why is it so important?
Well, at the beginning, I found it, I was very relieved to hear you say that it's not just for certain groups. Estate planning is actually for everyone. If you are 18 years or older, it is for you. It just depends to the extent that you're doing it.
Mhm.
And we love teaching and helping others. So it is a passion of ours to help with educating others in this area. So one, I think because of me going back to law school and saying, I don't get this, I'm like, let me help others understand why. And so for estate planning, it can be as simple as someone turning 18 years old and now being of majority age, needing their own legal documents, because parents might be surprised to actually hear that they can't actually make decisions or be able to help their now adult child unless the adult child actually does legal documents that authorizes it. And so even for an 18-year-old, we are recommending for anyone that they're looking at doing a healthcare power of attorney or healthcare proxy. So that way there's someone there that can make medical decisions for someone if they can't,
Mhm.
and that they're doing a financial durable power of attorney so that if they can't take care of anything on their financial end, so non-medical side, that someone can step in if that person can't. And
Mhm.
so even from a standpoint of an 18-year-old, they need an estate plan. So an estate plan can be as basic as that to, now talking where we've got a lot of assets and we're doing tax planning and we're doing a lot of trusts and incorporating in all that, but it can really run the gambit. So for estate planning, basically what you're looking at is you're looking at putting in place legal documents that express what your wishes are regarding who will take care of you if you can't, for both medical decisions as well as financially. And then down the road, upon your passing, making sure things get handled appropriately so that your wishes are carried out.
So you mentioned a couple important documents, and I think that that's something that not a lot of us think about. They think of the wills and the trusts, but since, even since COVID and other, like, people have felt more accepting of the fact that they maybe could be temporarily incapacitated. Maybe they could need somebody to step in, and maybe they don't realize that if their name is not on a bank account, that they can't do anything with it, even if it's their son or their spouse. Like, there are these rules that exist that maybe they don't seem reasonable because maybe you're paying the college tuition, but you can't request anything. But it is true that these, the times when you need these important documents, they tend to come up when you're under a lot of stress or pressure. So
Incredible.
what are some of those basic documents that nearly every adult should have?
Yeah, so for that, so one, as I mentioned, a healthcare power of
Mhm.
attorney, healthcare proxy, and other states, and I'm going to speak specifically for Massachusetts. We're talking about a healthcare proxy,
Mhm.
where that is a legal document where if you can't make your own medical decisions, someone is authorized to step in for you. So that's on the health side. Associated with that is something called a HIPAA. You've probably signed it at the doctor's offices before. It's based on the federal privacy statute that says, hey, unless you list these people down, they should not have access to your written medical information. So that usually goes hand in hand with the healthcare proxy or healthcare power of attorney. The last health document that a lot of people will want on the legal side is something called a living will, which is also known as an advance directive, which is basically saying that if doctors ever have to come back and say they can't do anything more and they can't communicate with you, this is the document that says it is okay not to do anything further.
Mhm.
So that is something that an attorney can also prepare for their client. So that's the health
Mhm.
documents that basically everyone should be looking at. And the living will is really a personal preference. It helps be able to make that decision when the time comes, but it is not a required document, but it can be very helpful should that ever be
Yeah.
needed.
Mhm.
So that's on the medical side. On the financial side, we've got everyone should really have what is called a durable financial power of attorney. So that way someone can step in to handle financial stuff for you, again, if you
Mhm.
can't. Or you might want someone to be able to do it now for you if you're in a situation or a stage of life where that makes sense. But for many people doing this proactively, which I encourage, please do this proactively. Oftentimes, we don't need to have it trigger unless that person can no longer do it, which means that they are incapacitated.
Mhm.
So everyone should have one of those. And then we can talk wills and trusts as
Yeah.
well.
No, I think those and these, these are very important time sensitive, these are types of things. And so sometimes I've even talked to people that have, want to help somebody. If they're not listed or they don't have a power of attorney, there is really nothing that I can do to help them on like sending out money or anything like that because they don't have the proper authority. So it's definitely something that I think is easier to think about when you are of sound mind and there's no pressure and you're feeling it just could be maybe just another thing to check off on your list of things to do at some point during this year is to take care of this stuff. And I do think when I talk to some people about the cost, there's a lot of misunderstandings too about what this investment could be to get this work done. I know it's quite expensive if you don't do it. Might not be, but if you do, I think there are some companies that offer a legal benefit, or it could surprise people that it's not as is terribly expensive as they think it is. So for something that's basic, I think it's definitely worth reaching out to an attorney to talk about, even as having a consultation about, what their needs might be and kind of what those prices look like, because I think a lot of people overestimate what some of the basic costs are. Is that something that you've found as well?
Yeah, I mean the cost can definitely run the gambit,
Hmm.
right?
Sure.
That being the case, your point about it's a lot more costly if someone doesn't and
Yes.
something happens. Because then we're talking about having to go into the court system to have someone get officially appointed in order to be able to handle that. And that is very expensive and very time consuming and very stressful for the family in a very difficult time.
Hmm.
But yeah, it can be very inexpensive too, again, depending on the level of complexity that we're dealing with, of course,
Hmm.
that can get more expensive. But yeah, it can be pretty inexpensive to get it done.
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of people that will tell me certain things, especially when they're talking about their money. They'll say, "Well, we don't want this person to touch that, or we don't want this to happen." And so it's difficult to explain to them that that needs to be legally. And I think a lot of us, what I hear the most, Tiff, is people saying, "My family will know what to do, and they'll do the right thing. I'm sure of it." And sometimes this leads to some estate planning shortcuts that people make, like maybe putting that responsible eldest daughter as the sole beneficiary. So she gets the full tax burden, she gets the full everything, and then is responsible for distributing out the funds to the rest of her sibling. What are some of these mistakes that people make? And really, are these, I think that while the intentions are good, the end result can be pretty difficult to administer. So, any thoughts on that as far as what some people might be trying to do to get around this situation that ends up being expensive in the end?
Yeah, so I've got a few different thoughts on this. So one, you hear about people who will say, "Oh, you know what? My situation is so simple, I don't need any documents." And that can lead to people having to go into the court system. And really, even though I'm an attorney, even though we do have to go into the court system, my goal is not to,
Mhm.
because no one likes it,
Yeah.
right? No one likes it. And again, time consuming, expensive, very stressful. So get something done, right? Now we'll see mistakes happen. One will be we'll have folks who will come to us to update their estate plan where they didn't do it with us before. And something that we see on those documents a lot, which please don't, anyone listening to this, don't let it be you. Please make sure that you actually have backups behind whoever you've named to take care of things. So it's not unusual for us to see someone else's documents that were done a while ago, and it only lists spouse as being the one taking care of things, right? Or it might be spouse and someone else, but maybe that person is, no longer living or can't do it anymore. So if you ever have a situation where there's no one available that's serving, you could be in the situation where you're back in the courts,
Yeah.
right? So making sure you've really had good legal guidance walking you through, talking about the pros and cons to what you're thinking about doing, is so important.
Mhm.
Your comment about naming the oldest.
Yeah.
Right? We hear that a lot too,
Mhm.
because like, oh, well, they're the oldest. Well, you've got a few things to think about. Number one, are they the best suited for that position?
Mhm.
They might be terrible at finances. And if you're putting them in a financial role,
Mhm.
you're kind of creating a future stressful potential disaster situation. Or you're putting someone who would find it very difficult to make health decisions for
Mhm.
you.
Yes.
You've really got to think out who you're naming in order to be able to make sure you've got an appropriate person who would, one, be willing, but
Mhm.
also would be suited for the position.
Yeah.
Because it really is not a privilege, it's a job. So,
His job. Yes.
yeah, I get very happy when I have family members who don't want to name me. I'm like,
Yeah,
hey,
yeah, no, I agree. And I think that that's something that's important to think about because you're right. There are some people where you just, you know, maybe some people couldn't make tough medical decisions, and some people might be able to. Like, I would be able to make that decision if, say, there was no brain activity or something. I would say, well, okay, nope, where, where I think, in a couple situations in my family, like my mother, she probably would have kept my father alive forever. Just because it would have been too difficult. And so I think those are things that you have to kind of think about in guardianship, all of these things, because you might think, oh, it'll just get figured out. But for something like custody of minor children and things like that, it might be a few people who want to help or nobody who steps in and help. And then what is the result of that? It ends up confusion, stress, and a lot of court dates. So
exactly.
these things they're too important to leave to chance or to leave to very, very stressed out people who are
Right.
now dealing with more than just the loss of life or the accident or anything that happens that's also on their plates now. So I think, yeah, getting ahead of these things are super important. And there's sometimes when I'll talk with people who not only think about estate planning when it comes to, maybe preserving or being for wealthy people or reserving wealth. But in states like ours in Massachusetts, it's not a very high amount of money that you need to cross over as far as a net worth threshold to be subject to estate planning. So say you're just a regular homeowner in Massachusetts who has some valuable property over $1 million and maybe some money in a retirement account. What are some things that people should be thinking about in states like ours where estate taxes and things can be very, very relevant?
Right. And so what Misty's talking about here is she's talking about when someone has an exposure for something called an estate tax. This is a tax that hits upon someone passing. It hits on a federal level if someone's assets are high enough, but it can also hit on a state level. And Massachusetts has a state level estate tax. That used to hit when someone's assets went above 1 million. It did increase to 2 million, but when you start adding in people's retirement accounts, life insurance, equity in the home, it can start to add. And so if someone's one of their goals is to help minimize the impact of that tax, that requires that they be very proactive in doing a specific kind of an estate plan that can help reduce those estate taxes legally and legitimately. And so one of the things that we didn't talk on that I just want to
Mhm.
mention, which is really something that everyone should have, is something called a will, which is a legal document that says what you want to have happen upon passing for assets, for any assets that go through the probate court. And so that's the court that deals with someone's assets upon passing when there was nowhere for that asset to go, which means it ended up in their sole name alone without a beneficiary or without a co-owner or without it being owned by a trust. And so a will is just instructions for the probate court. Now, if someone has minor children, that is also where someone will nominate who would take care of minor children. So that is crucial for any parent to have, just because that's where you would nominate who would take care of any children you have. So that is definitely a foundation document. But now we're tipping into talking about trust.
Mhm.
And so when we're talking about trust for estate taxes, we can do irrevocable trust if appropriate, or we can, if someone is married, do revocable trusts that help minimize that estate tax impact. But trusts aren't just for saving on taxes. They can be there to help with asset protection.
Mhm.
They can be there to help just make sure that things don't go through probate and that they have somewhere to go and go in the manner that you want. Like if you have something going to um, someone who is under, let's say, the age of 25,
Mhm.
you may say, you know what, I want them to be at least 25 before they get control of that, or maybe they're 30, right? A
Mhm.
trust can help make sure assets are taken care of, person is benefiting, but they don't get control until a certain age.
Yeah.
Whereas if it goes for a beneficiary designation, upon them reaching age majority, 18, they would have control.
I can think about where I would have spent money at 18
Right?
and
I know. It was
versus
not a
30. It would
retirement
have been quite
account.
different. It would have made some different financial decisions. So, yeah, I think that's important because a lot of times people think that, well, I think there's a few misconceptions. I think people think of, I talk to people a lot who are like, I just need to avoid probate. And there's not really like I think that that is, while that is true, you want to minimize it and have a plan, that maybe there will end up being some things that go through the probate court. And I think that if you, without any planning, there's a guarantee of that. Like if you
Sure.
do nothing, that is absolutely going to happen. But for a lot of people, they might have heard. Maybe they've heard on the news, like, you all must have an irrevocable trust. I definitely know that there's some big financial advisors out there who definitely say that everybody needs that. And some people might not understand, what do they need and what don't they need? So, um, when you talk about those trusts, what are the differences? I know there's one major difference that people should be aware of as far as between revocable and irrevocable trusts. But explain a little bit more about when those come into play and how they help people.
Yeah, happy to. So, first of all, what is a trust? So, a trust is just a set of instructions that says what you want to have happen with anything that the trust ends up owning, whether because an asset was transferred to the trust during your life or because it was, say, the beneficiary of something for upon your passing. And so, knowing that there are two kinds of trusts, there are trusts that are called revocable trusts with an R, and then there are trusts that are called irrevocable trusts with an I. They have very different purposes. With a revocable trust, the one with the R, because it's revocable, you, as the person setting it up, can change it anytime you want. You can be the one taking care of things, you can be the one benefiting. It's really still all yours during life because you're keeping full control. It's just a way to help be able to provide for things upon your incapacity and upon passing. So it's a foundational trust that we do with everyone. Now, irrevocable trusts, though, are very different. With an irrevocable trust, hence the term, when someone sets it up, it's irrevocable. So think of it as a one and done. You better be very comfortable transferring an asset to it because after you transfer it to it, you don't own it anymore. You might have a right to income, but otherwise you don't own it. And so that's a big deal. Irrevocable trusts are not for everyone. There are definitely certain circumstances where they do make sense. And so I would say for irrevocable trust, when someone's looking at, they're looking at for a few different reasons.
Mhm.
One, they might be looking at it that their assets are to such a level that they know they don't need certain assets and they will never need them. And so therefore they might be gifting them away now in order to be able to help for taxes.
Mhm.
They might be doing it for that reason. They might be doing an irrevocable trust for asset protection purposes. It could be that someone's in a profession that no matter what they do, there's a likelihood of them getting sued. And so irrevocable trust can help provide some asset protection for certain assets. But again, they can't do it if they know they're going to get sued, but
Mhm.
they can do it well in advance, thinking just because of what I do, there is a
Yeah.
potential. For the other area of asset protection, which we see more commonly, people will do irrevocable trusts because they might be starting to get older. They're worried that someday their assets may dwindle, and they want to do advanced planning in order to be able to provide for usually family. And so with this type of planning, they're doing it for asset protection, but they're doing it to try to help make sure that a family member is going to be okay in the future.
Yeah. No, and I think those are important things to consider because, I do have a lot of clients who have revocable trust. And that, it really is it's very similarly their asset. We treat it the same way, they have complete, control over it. Where, as you mentioned before, it belongs to another entity now. It's not
Right.
you. And so it is very important when you're making those decisions to speak with a lawyer about that. And also, one of the things that I hear a lot is for some clients who are trying to, they're thinking about long-term care, as you mentioned, aging, and they're thinking about long-term care, and they're thinking about Medicaid planning. And I'll get all sorts of questions about, oh, should I give this condo to my child? Should I get this out of my name? Should I do everything? And so I have some personal mixed feelings about this because I do feel like the Medicaid planning it's quite low what your assets need to. And I don't think people quite understand that because as somebody who's, been in tougher financial positions before, I understand that is, it is not a place you necessarily want to like put yourself into. But from your perspective, what are some of the things you hear when people are thinking about, long-term care, aging, and Medicaid planning? And what are some of your thoughts on how people can be smart about it, um, but also stay within, the law?
Yeah, and so that we could do a whole podcast on alone. But there's a few things, first of all, that I want to kind of give a foundation on so that we can build on it. So when people hear about Medicaid planning, I want to talk about what Medicaid is.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, Medicaid is not Medicare.
Mm-hmm.
Medicare is the health system that someone will tap into. Usually it's there for someone once they get to the age of 65 or older, right? So that is not the health system. Medicaid is the governmental benefit that is out there. It's run by the states, but it is partially funded by the federal government. Medicaid is there as a governmental benefit to provide for folks who can no longer pay for their own long-term care needs. So a lot of people are surprised to hear that if someone needs to go into a nursing home or assisted living, someone is privately paying from their own assets for that. That doesn't fall under the health system. That doesn't fall under Medicare. That falls for you are paying for that yourself. Medicaid is there to tap in if someone is at the level where they are in a skilled nursing level nursing home. So this is
Mm-hmm.
not assisted living. And they're in a skilled nursing home where because they're in there and they no longer have assets to pay for their care, the government will then kick in and pay for the person's care. This is not something someone should actually want to get to, right? We refuse to do, for our firm, we refuse to do any planning where it is impoverishing someone so that they can apply for that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's times when we have to do it because there is no
There is
assets.
nothing.
Yes, we are there to help the family. We are there to help them with the lengthy, frustrating application process. But proactively, we don't want someone to actually impoverish themselves to end up in that position.
Mm-hmm.
Our goal is to get them connected with folks like Misty, so that way we can help try to make sure they have a solid financial plan that is in place not only for today, but also what happens tomorrow and if they need long-term care. But the idea for Medicaid planning is when we're talking with clients about it, we're trying to help them see what they can do to help avoid it, but also having those frank conversations that they may be on a path where that is going to
Yeah.
happen.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
we're there to help with trying to do some planning, especially if someone is married and someone has a spouse at home. We never want to see a situation where someone has spent down because when someone taps into Medicaid for a nursing home, that means if they're single, they've spent their assets down to $2,000. There is nothing else. If someone is married, it's just over $150,000 that they have spent their assets down to. We don't want that to happen, especially when there's a spouse at home
Mhm.
who needs to be provided for.
Yeah, it's such a, and I think this is another one of those areas that is a really, it's a sensitive topic, and I think it's something that people really have maybe some limited information on. And like I said before, I attended a full day training basically for these sections because it is, sometimes the intentions are good. I want to, do some, I want to make sure that it's not always just I want to get away with paying as little as possible. But I think what we're seeing lately is these costs are climbing. And there are really some, some unfortunate situations we're seeing where people, where it is quickly, it's easy to spend down your assets when it comes to this situation where you do need that assisted living or skilled nursing. So it's such an important financial conversation, but also on the legal side to make sure that you're doing everything that you can to facilitate it properly and make sure, like you said, you're not trying to impoverish yourself because at that point, I don't think people quite understand how low these limits are. Now, some people might if they're maybe another area of estate planning that I think is super important is for people that have special needs or
Yeah.
some other issues. So if you have anybody that you're in your family or anybody that that has medical needs and things like that, these limits for what they can actually own are extremely low. So it's very important to make sure that you're doing planning and talking with an attorney about how to make sure that these people, people in your life are properly protected and cared for because maybe they shouldn't be the beneficiary on something or maybe maybe there should be better ways or trusts or things that you could use to help out. Have you seen that happen in some scenarios?
Oh, very much. And so, yeah, and so tapping into, and again, special needs can be a whole, again,
Hmm.
separate podcast on this. But yeah, if you have a special needs person that's in your life that you want to make sure you're taking care of, it's crucial that you're going to see an attorney who specializes in that area in order to help guide. So that way you're not running afoul of any benefits that person might be entitled to and making sure that they're being set up well and that you're not hindering them.
Yeah. Yeah, because it can be something that could accidentally happen even with a small amount of money. It could put certain benefits in jeopardy. So those are just, some situations where it's really, really important to speak with somebody who can help you.
Right.
And there's no judgment. I think there's a lot of times where people come to us with different ideas or things that they've heard from somebody else. And I think that it's more important to, yeah, be curious and ask questions because there could be things that are maybe do impact you or maybe could be an option for you. But then there's other times where we just kind of need to explain a little bit in more detail what that would actually entail or mean.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that's where we professionals can come in and really help provide value in that, yes, please do your education, do research. Hey, have I looked on GPT for things? Sure.
Sure.
But I also make sure I then go and verify or help get more information. And so I guess one of my recommendations would be is as you're hearing things, as you're researching things, you need to then do further research. Is that actually true?
Yeah. Yes. Is that true? Is it applicable to me? Was it sourced from somebody's opinion piece on Reddit somewhere? Yes. All important things to figure out. Last thing I wanted to ask about, we've just, the holiday season has ended, and maybe there's some people listening who think, I kind of noticed some differences with maybe some of their older relatives. Maybe they had just that suspicion that maybe they don't see each other all that often, and then after a year passes that maybe they seem like the capacity could be changing. Or what are some of the things that you recommend people do if they have loved ones that are aging and they want to take care of them well, but they don't know how to maybe approach those sensitive conversations about capacity, about independence and things like that. And I've seen some scenarios where some of my very smart, very intelligent clients have been scammed or fallen for something. And so I think it's so important to be able to talk about these things without um without fear or hesitation, just so it's kind of an when these things come up. So how would you recommend that people approach these topics, especially if the power dynamic is somewhat shifting in a relationship where, you might have to think about how to care for older relatives in your family?
Yeah, yeah. Again, I think that can be a whole other topic again. But just, thinking just some brief thoughts on that is one being, yes, during the holidays, people will tend to suddenly see that, oh gosh, this person is not doing as well as the last time I saw them. So it is a time when people do start to notice more than what they had before. So then it comes down on as to how receptive that aging person is to help.
Hmm.
We hear time and time again that aging person is like, no, I'm fine, or no, I'm all set.
Hmm.
Right. And so I think the more that you can try to have open conversations, and we have found that sometimes something that can be helpful is not so much putting that person on the spot, saying, hey, you got to be careful of this, you got to be careful of this,
Hmm.
but talking about things that you're going through. So, hey, I got my own estate plan done. This is what I did. This is why I did it.
Hmm.
Or, hey, I've heard about these scams that are happening, and this is what I'm doing to try to make sure. So sometimes if you're taking that pressure off that aging person so that that aging person doesn't feel that they've done wrong, that can help. There's a lot of psychology involved in this, but that being the case, sometimes it can just be impossible that you can't lead a horse to water and make the horse drink,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So that person does have to be willing to have the conversations to actually do something. So even I think if you're in a situation where you can't get that person to do anything, I do think that it's good for you to actually reach out to professionals and get consulting from those professionals so that, yes, you might be picking up the pieces because you can't get anything in place,
Mhm.
but at least you'll be prepared for when that time comes. So if you're, please have the conversations, try
Mhm.
to help make something happen. That is the best situation. But even if you can't, try to be prepared yourself so that way you can help step in and pick up the pieces.
Yeah. And I think that's where, we can help, in some of the having those conversations because it is important. And I think sometimes if you feel like you have no one to talk to and you're trying to figure out what to do with your mom or your dad or aunt and uncle and it's intimidating and they don't want that, there are certain things, that other people have tried or other things you could do. And there's a ton of information out there, but I do think that getting that support is very helpful. I mean, I've talked to some people who've had to just go take the car the night and all of these
Right.
things that happen because at some point you may be forced to make a decision. So I feel like if you're able to have conversations, if you're able to bring up topics, if you're able to say, hey, I heard about this, or I listened to a podcast and these two women were talking about this situation. What do you have a will? Find out because at some point, the worst thing that can happen is, you have no idea. And then you're forced to try to back into where was anything? Is there even, do I know what their wishes would be? And it's really, really challenging to figure that stuff out. And so I know from my experience, I lost my father last year and I had a clue what he wanted, but it was just one of those, very sudden things. There was no time to figure things out. And so I think we can hope for the best, but a lot of times it might be having those very transparent conversations that maybe are uncomfortable. But I think that more people talk and people are curious, and maybe there's something that people have seen online that scared them or thought maybe they heard a story that happened to a friend that maybe they do want to talk
Yeah, and
more
that
than you think they might. I ask a lot of awkward questions. I think it's one of my top skills in my role. But some people really do want to talk and they have a lot on their mind and they want somebody to care. And they are maybe thinking the same things too, but don't want to upset you. So I think
right.
that if you can work with your people, work with your network, your team of people, and get some good ideas, maybe even if it's just for some conversation starters. I think that could definitely help people just be more prepared for some of these things.
Exactly, because things are going to happen.
Yeah,
And the more prepared that you are, the more options that there are, and oftentimes the better care can be provided.
yeah. I agree. I think that, and that I think is a very kind thing to do. And I've talked to people about things like estate planning, life insurance, all these things that are unpleasant, but you're right, they are going to happen. And so it's really, I think it's better and I think it's more kind to be proactive about it and see what you can do in advance when things are good, when things are calm. So when things aren't calm, you have a better understanding of what the best next step is without having to guess. So I know I mentioned so many different topics today. I think we could probably have five or six. We could have a whole series on this podcast about things that you could do as far as your finances and estate planning. But I wanted to bring up a lot of things because for somebody listening, maybe it's the thought about skilled nursing care. Maybe it's the thought about somebody with special needs, or maybe you have a baby home. The last thing you've thought about was guardianship because you're just, but these are just important thoughts. A kid going to college, wherever you're at in life, I do think that, you know, this is one of those things that it doesn't hurt to be without an estate plan. There's no acute pain that you feel, kind of like being in debt. You can be in debt forever and you get used to it and comfortable with it. But if it is something that's on your mind and you want to take control of this, there is no better time. There is no right time to do it than to start planning and getting these things taken care of now, because it's so important. So for anybody listening, maybe Tiff, they wanted to learn more about you or your firm, or even just follow you for more advice or information. How can people find you if something on this podcast has triggered a few thoughts in their mind and they're saying, yep, this is the time to get it done? How can they find you?
So they can find us by going to our website, which is O'Connell Law Group. So OCONNELL and then LEWGROUP.com. So there are three L's in a row. On there at the bottom of our website main page, you'll find links for our social media. Please feel free to follow us there. You'll find links to be able to sign up for our newsletter on our website. And there also you'll find a link for a book that I've written to really try to help folks understand estate planning.
Mhm.
And so my goal was really to provide someone with a good tool. So if you're like, oh, I forgot to write this down, I actually have a book to be able to help folks with that. So there's a lot of resources on that website. There's definitely webinars and all that. So I encourage folks. Again, we're trying to help educate. So even if you don't come in as a client, please feel free to use that website as a resource. It's there for everyone.
Yes, thank you so much, Tiff. I think, yes, if you go to the website, look at this information, there is so much there that's valuable that can help, whether it's the book, if you want to start learning more and you want to get information, there are no stupid questions in this area. There are just questions. It is different for everyone, but I feel like there's a lot of help for you if you are somebody who's trying to figure out what's the right thing to do for yourself or your family. I think that that's just a wonderful resource and follow along. And also for other financial advisors, accountants, if you guys are listening, get on their newsletter too. That was a very, very helpful day-long event where I learned so much, and it's just such an important topic that I don't feel like anybody could really understand well enough. So get on that newsletter. It's certainly going to be helpful for you to follow Tiff and her firm because they're doing a wonderful thing. So thank you, Tiff, for joining us today. And for everybody listening, these are tough topics. We understand that. We understand that it's not easy to think about what to do in these situations where maybe you're not around anymore, or you have to step in and make decisions for somebody that used to make all the decisions for you. But the more the more planning you can do, the better, whether it's financial planning, estate planning. I've never I've never really met anybody who felt like, oh, they planned they planned too well. for these things. So if you're looking at getting control of your financial plan, head over to mistylynch.com. There's definitely some resources there. You can connect with me at Soundview Financial Advisors, or you can just listen to more episodes of the podcast, get a copy of the book, or start to learn more about how to get control of your financial life, which I definitely know will start to benefit all other areas that you're dealing with as well. So thank you all very much for joining, and we'll talk again next week. Don't forget to share with friends and family, and together let's demystify the world of money. Knowledge is the key to financial empowerment.